Hi there, it's Alana, and as promised, I'm just going to walk through your unit plan template stage by stage and point out a few things that I'm noticing, maybe ask some clarifying questions, and give you some feedback for revision. We do have about 3 weeks left in the semester to make those changes and revisions before its final submission. And if you have any questions about any of the feedback that I'm giving you, as always, please just reach out by email. So we will start here with your stage one, and it looks like you're doing about a 3.5 week ninth grade history unit. And your description is that you are going to be explaining how racism in the United States has made a huge impact in our society and how we still struggle with it today. I will start with the beginning of slavery and work my way up to present day, and then look at what there is to do to stop this kind of behavior. Just a couple of questions. One is whether you're going to be covering a very large time span, from mid or early 19th century virtually up to modern day. So that was kind of one question I had right away, thinking about a reasonable time span to cover and look at this really complex and important concept of racism. So under desired results, it looks like you still need to put in the graduation standards and guiding principles. I'm looking down here at the primary and supporting indicators, which, remember, we go from standards, which are still pretty big, and we unpack them a little bit more into those performance indicators, which are the more measurable and observable pieces of what we would be observing and assessing our students on. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up a Word doc version of your unit plan template just to kind of show you too in Word that it looks like for graduation standards that they're not listed here. I'm assuming that you've gone ahead and broken down somewhat into the indicators, but the graduation standard language I think you still need to place here, as well as guiding principles. You can do a Google search of Maine's guiding principles, and you will see several of them, including clear and effective communicator, practical problem solver. So those are sort of those overarching work habits or transferable skills that are really high level that the state of Maine has indicated that they want all learners to graduate with. So it might be best to kind of think about those after you write your unit, kind of what guiding principles might be easily embedded into the unit. So the next question I have here is that it appears like you don't have any primary indicators. You only have supporting indicators listed for your unit. I'm thinking that maybe you meant to put these indicators actually up above with primary indicators, because the primary indicators are those really that your unit is based upon, and they are the indicators that you will use to actually build your summative assessment. So if it's a performance indicator listed as primary, it's going to be assessed in the unit. If it's supporting, and I'm using the language from the unit plan template guide that is supplied to you in Blackboard, the supporting indicators are indicators where you are reviewing or revisiting a previously taught concept, or you're planting a seed for something that you're going to follow through with more and teach in a future unit. So as we get down into essential questions and enduring understandings, I'm noticing that these are still areas that need to be filled in. Essential questions are kind of high-level critical thinking questions that don't have a clear answer. So how does conflict lead to change? Or in what ways do we see themes of racism across decades? That might be kind of an essential question versus what year did something happen, or more kind of recall or a specific type of answerable question. And an enduring understanding is some sort of concept that transfers across time and across place. So you could very clearly have some enduring understandings related to racism that is part of a big picture understanding of this issue across decades and across centuries for that matter. We get down next to what students need to know and be able to do. So remember that this first stage is about using this backward planning model and making really clear what it is at the end of the unit that we want our students to show us evidence of being able to know and do. And so here you're breaking down those performance indicators into what are the concepts, what are the terms, what is the vocabulary that we would expect that students would come away with having knowledge of and proficiency in, versus what they are able to do, skills, processes, strategies that they're going to be using. So for example, what students might you might want them to know, and I'm talking through the the filter of an English teacher, but I might want them to know about the rhetorical triangle, or hyperbole, or even a concept in literature like transcendentalism. But what I want them to be able to do is to analyze literature to look for common themes or patterns. I want them to rhetorically analyze an argument by an author. I want them to use context clues to determine the meanings of words. So this is knowledge-based, this is skill-based that you're separating out onto that template. And actually think on the template there's a table that kind of separates it into left and right. So now we get into stage 2 with your scoring criteria. Your scoring criteria are developed using the language or the concepts in your performance indicators, your primary indicators. So again, I'm not sure what happened, but it looks like you've lost the table formatting for the 4 levels. So for your scoring criteria, you will want to indicate on the left-hand side what your specific indicators are, and then you start with developing language of proficiency. So depending on your primary indicators, what is the observable evidence of what proficiency would look like with that scoring criteria? And that's your 3 level, your MEETS level. So you're going to start with developing that language for each of the performance indicators. You will then think about the 4s and the 2s, right? So for the 4, you're thinking about an extension of thinking. You're thinking about increased cognitive complexity. So look at Webb's depth of knowledge verbs. Think about Bloom's taxonomy, so that if we have alignment between the performance indicator and the scoring criteria of MEETS, for example, if it's analysis of a text that you want students to do at that MEETS level, maybe the 4 level is synthesis. Or if you're talking about students describing a concept at the 3 level, at the MEETS level, then maybe they are describing a concept but also contrasting it or comparing it to another concept at the 4 level. So the 4 level is about increased complexity. It's not about doing more work. The 1 and 2 levels, just a couple of things to keep in mind, and this is somewhat repetitive of information in Blackboard, but you want to make sure that you use positive language versus deficit language. So a clear description of what it looks like that students are able to provide evidence of at those 2 levels versus what they can't do yet. And also to try to stay away from some really subjective language like understands or especially beautiful description or something that's going to be hard to measure objectively. Next, we get down into the pre-assessment and summative assessment task. So in your unit, how will you pre-assess students? What does that process look like that you're going to use to figure out where your learners are before you start the unit? Because we know that good teachers might adjust instruction to meet where learners are. And so it could be that students have a lot of background knowledge. Maybe they have a lot of misconceptions. So you need to really think about how you're going to pre-assess their prior knowledge. And then we get into a really critical component of the unit plan template, and that's your summative assessment task. And so the summative assessment task, remember, is directly aligned to your performance indicators. So you are measuring in that summative assessment task whatever that demonstration of student learning is. It matches what you said that you set out to measure for students' knowledge and skills in the beginning of the unit, so that there's that clear alignment between those 2 things. So your summative assessment task, this is really up to you. I mean, this could be a choice in proficiency-based systems. We often see that there's a choice of different assessments for students to demonstrate their proficiency. It could be something that you more so prescribe, and that's okay. What I'm asking with students is that anything that you have related to your summative assessment task, whether it's a handout, it's a resource, it's a list of materials or tools, to make that as clear and transparent and link things right in here so that it's very clear. A teacher could walk in essentially and deploy this assessment if you weren't there, and students clearly know what their assessment task is. In stage 3, we get into instructional design. So we first have the hook. How will you spark some interest? How will you engage students? How will you kind of get in with that meaningful and memorable sort of nugget in the beginning of the unit that sets that foundation that really makes them want to learn this material or develop these skills? And then again, I think that this is a little bit different from what the format is intended to be. When you do this again, when you revise this, I'd ask that you use that table format, because you're creating 5 distinct rows to represent 5 consecutive days of instruction. So for each day of instruction in this stage, you need to identify the granular learning targets. So in the next 45 minutes, a typical class period or a block period of an hour and a half, whatever it might be, breaking down those performance indicators even more specifically. What are you going to be focusing on? So if I have my standard is that students will be able to write effective arguments, maybe my performance indicators really get at different argumentative strategies that they might use, and so rhetorical devices that they might use, like ethos or pathos or logos. But then at my learning target level, for that 45 minutes, I might really want students to be able to describe what ethos is, or I want them to identify examples of pathos in a text. And so learning targets are kind of small, and they're based on that daily lesson kind of time frame. Formative assessments, we know, are check-ins with our learners so that we can constantly adjust our instruction, the pace. We can also know more so when our students are ready to be formally assessed. And so these might be exit tickets, these might be quizzes, these might be observations, discussions. Anything that you use, again, for formative assessment, you need to be specific. So if you have an exit slip, if you have an activity, to really link that in and make it clear what exactly your formative assessment is, trying to be as specific and transparent as you can be in this particular stage. And then the third column is about learning experiences. A key word I just want to point out is differentiated, because in a proficiency or competency-based system, we know that we're trying to honor that students learn in different time frames and in different ways. So what types of learning activities would you plan for students in terms of they might need more time, they might need more resources? Think about your struggling learners, think about learners that you want to extend, that kind of get it within the first 10 minutes of that class. How will you kind of extend their learning without punishing them for kind of getting it sooner than everyone else? What might you do for students who are English language learners? What might you do for students who have auditory difficulties, let's say, or visual impairments? So try to show your range, your teacher range, in terms of designing different learning activities within a class period. So in that column with learning experiences, again, link in the videos, the resources, the handouts, anything that you would use that you could then hand to someone to be able, again, to model this or to replicate this. So I'd be looking for hot links or hyperlinks in that section, or attachments that you note after the end of the unit plan template. Resources is part of stage 4. Again, I'm not sure, this looks a little bit wonky in terms of the formatting, but resources here actually belongs down under here in stage 4. So this is just where you're going to park, link in, attach any resources that show your deep, vast toolbox as a teacher. So maybe you have more resources in terms of different texts at different levels of complexity. Maybe you have some supplementary resources. Maybe you have another content area standards linked in because you have somewhat of an interdisciplinary unit. So I know through your lens as with this unit in ninth grade history that you might also have some reading and writing, some ELA Common Core standards. And Common Core does have those standards that are cross-cutting through multiple disciplines that deal with things like doing research and really being able to write effectively. So this is kind of where you're parking any additional resources that you didn't link in stage 3 and that you think show evidence of having a really robust unit plan template where you're thinking about a lot of different types of learner needs. And then you won't actually fill out the student reflection and teacher reflection. It's important for you to note that this would-be unit plan planning is an iterative process where you're constantly reflecting and revising, and rarely do the most effective teachers continue to kind of do the same thing each time that they use a unit plan template. They make adjustments, they improve, they reflect on what worked well and what they could improve upon. So this is just kind of a holding place to show that reflection is important and we honor it with a place in the unit plan template. So I hope that this feedback was helpful to you, that it gives you some action steps for your next revision. I do think that for your submitted unit plan template, I would have expected a little bit more detail and attention to kind of the formatting at this point. So even though you are ultimately revising for the end of the semester, I would just ask that you within the next week email to me some sort of revised product so that I can see that you are beginning to attempt some of these revisions and making some changes based on the feedback. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, and I hope you have a great weekend.